We'll go ahead and get started here as people fill in. Thank you everyone for joining this self-storage security challenges and solutions webinar. Um, Wanted to go over today's agenda first off, and obviously we're going to talk about the security challenges and risks that are presented with a self-storage facility. Then we're going to go into one of the biggest topics and biggest challenges that most self-storage facilities have, and that's the infrastructure, not having network access, sometimes not having power access, or not even sure what you've got and got. So we're going to go over that. We're going to go over some of the camera solutions, services, and then with any remaining time, we'll have kind of an open Q&A as well. So a little bit about SEW for those who are not familiar with us. We're a value-driven company that provides end-to-end security solutions. So that's security cameras, access control. We do this through free consultation. So any questions, anything that you want to know about or get a plan out, our team's there, security expert team is there to help you. And unique to us is that we have an installation. We can do nationwide installation and also potentially do self-install as well. So if you choose that you want to prefer to install this yourself, you can do that too. We're very flexible with that. You can choose some of your locations to self-install and some of the other ones, we'll do them for you, whatever you prefer. And our biggest differentiators are world-class support, all based here in North Carolina, that's there to help you not just make sure the system's running right, but make sure you know how to use the system as best as possible. So let's jump right into it. Self-storage security challenges, the risk and challenges first off. You know, Self-storage has always been one of those places that we get a lot of interest in and we work with a lot of self-storage facilities in. And part of the reason is they're in some ways kind of a little bit of a natural target. You can see every day there seems to be a message or a headline about, self-storage burglaries and break-ins and everything else that happens with that. And the reason is kind of a little bit of a natural target. You know, because people are storing items in, relatively, unless it's an indoor facility only, usually in an openish kind of area. And most of them don't have 24/7 employees or security, right? Obviously some of you guys might have gates, fences, and that can help, but I'm sure you've seen people cut fences or jump fences, and so it helps, but it definitely doesn't stop things. So and what happens when there is a break-in or somebody's items are stolen? Clients expect that their items are safe and secure at self-storage facilities. And when a break-in does happen, it can be kind of difficult to recover that relationship. That could be, losing that tenant, having to smooth things over, potentially having to give them lower rates or free time periods. And then the other thing is that you don't necessarily want to gain a reputation for one that's, an unsafe self-storage place. So, because that could end up having more vacancies and more need to potentially lower rates as well. So, the other major thing that we see with a lot of self-storage, and this is actually true outside of self-storage too, but criminals often go back to the well, right? And if they're successful in one place, they typically will go back. May not be the next day, maybe months from now, but if they were successfully able to get a score out of one place, they'll put that in their back of their mind and go back there. Um, Especially if it was an easier target with, no security, stuff like that. Lightning can strike twice. And I think, maybe everybody in this has already sort of maybe experienced that or has had colleagues in the industry experience that. And you may go, well, I know that. What can we actually do about it? Um, and the add-on to that is like, what can I do about it? Because maybe we have infrastructure challenges. And I think almost every self-storage owner wants to provide the best security possible. And they often don't feel like they can because of the infrastructure of their building, right? There's no network connection from, this side of the building, or maybe sometimes not even power. What can you actually do to get camera coverage? We all know we want camera coverage in there. How do we actually do it? So I've got an example here of just a self-storage facility, and I'll go ahead and do my best John Madden impression here. And you can see up here is where the office is. And the rest of this very likely in most situations does not have any network access. So what that means is that, if we want to place cameras over here or on any of these buildings here, it's not possible in its current state. And I think sometimes the idea is that, what can we actually do about that? So let's go ahead and jump forward a little bit here. And you can see that the distance between these two buildings as well is about 225 feet. So, it's a decent little run, definitely not something you'd probably do with like an aerial cable or anything like that. So the first question we're going to have and what we'll do to work with you in your facility is to figure out, you know, if we know the internet and the video recorder is going to be in your main office up there, can we run cable down that building on the left there? So that means basically, can we run cables across here on the exterior and be able to run cameras over here? That's going to be our first go for that, because we're doing the path of least resistance, right? This is going to be the easiest way of getting some camera coverage in there, and oftentimes we can do that. So couple things about doing that though is when we're dealing with external cabling, again with self-storage, there's not an internal place sometimes to put these in there. The internal space is the property at that point of the tenants in a way, right? So you can't just run cable inside and like a lot of other businesses can. So the cable has to be run on the exterior in this situation. And we use something called conduit. So if you're not familiar with that, it's basically just the metal, usually metal pipe that kind of protects the cable from the elements. So you can see it up here. And this is going to protect it against vandalism and, people who want to do bad, they might try to cut down cameras, everything like that. But also the environment. So things like animals, squirrels going and chewing cable, it happens. The sun and other kind of stuff like that going in there. As well as any accidents, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Maybe somebody backs up their rented um, truck and hits the cable and pulls down a cable or something like that. We want to avoid that. So we're almost always going to use conduit in these situations, or recommend it if you're doing a self-install. That now. So if we were able to deliver, which should be very possible here, to be able to run cable down up and down this section of the building here, you can see what coverage that gets us. You can see we can now place cameras on this right side of the building, and you can see that gets us pretty good coverage over here. So we're able to see, people coming in here, and over here during this section is very well covered. This section's going to be very well covered. And these cones, by the way, that we're looking at here are actually the facial recognition range. So that's going to basically tell us how clear we can see a face. These cameras will see, 100 feet. They'll be able to see to the end here, but we won't get quite the detail that we may want to be able to identify a face and make sure we can, use that as evidence. So that's what it's showing here. It is going to cover much more than we're actually seeing. So we got the right side partial, mostly covered, but what about the left side? And like we mentioned earlier on, this is 225 feet across. So, a camera that can see it might be able to see a person over here, but you're not going to get any kind of detail on them. You're only going to be able to see that, yeah, that's kind of the shape of a person at that distance, right? For most cameras, or at least for most wide angle cameras that we see here. So what are the three options we kind of got here? So the option number one, and this is kind of one that, I think sometimes it's easy to let, there's a saying that says, don't let perfect become the enemy of good. And, sometimes just installing cameras on the right side and getting really good coverage on the right and some little bit of coverage on the left is much better than not having any coverage whatsoever. And so, What you may want to do in that situation, if we decide, hey, at this point, we're just going to cover the right side, and maybe later on in a phase two kind of thing, we check out the left side and the other part of the facility, then let's go ahead and really focus on where everyone has to go in and out of, right? Everyone has to go in and out of this gate. So we want to make sure that we get a really good coverage of the vehicles coming in. So we can kind of see maybe even a license plate camera to be able to capture the license plates as they leave the facility. So that way we can keep track of who's coming and who's going into the facility. Because if we just do the right side, we're gonna lack details on the left side of that facility. So the license plate will be a key one that we can get out of that. So this is going to be kind of best on the budget. Obviously, it's not the most ideal coverage, but again, good is better than nothing. Second option here would be to add zoom cameras. So all the cameras we see on this map over here are wide angle cameras. So they're built to cover a lot of area in a range of anywhere between 50 to 75 feet or so. So that means within 50 to 75 feet, for most of these cameras, we're going to be able to see a face quite well. Anything past that, again, it might see it, but the details just aren't going to be there. So what we could do in this case is potentially add like a zoom camera here. So imagine we add a camera over here, and then, we specifically zoom it in to see sort of like this area here. And that would allow us to get much more detail from that to that left side without having to install anything on that side of the building. Now, this is definitely an option. This is one that we may use in some situations. The issue with that is that you need a lot of zoom cameras at that point. So, you're talking about maybe needing 3 or 4 of them to cover this sort of section here. And zoom cameras that generally will cost more than the standard fixed lens wide angle cameras. So, again, that's a potential option we may look into. But it's going to increase the budget obviously over the first option, and increase your coverage as well. But again, this is going to be one of the more costly ones, but it relies less on having to have infrastructure. So that's another avenue we may look into to add zoom. And the third way is to add network. So this is going to really increase our flexibility. It's going to increase our coverage, and it's probably going to be less than actually adding zoom cameras in most situations. So how are we going to add network access to that left building? Because we're using IP cameras, so we can do network access to those cameras. How are we going to get that done? Well, the first option would be trenching or cabling, if you've already got a facility, that's pretty much a no-go. You're gonna have to rip up the concrete, spend tens of thousands of dollars to run a cable across. It's almost never something that is feasible for most things. Maybe if you're doing a full demolition and rebuild or something like that, that might be possible. Or if you're somebody who's planning out a brand new facility, that might be something that is a lot more feasible in the early stages or the planning stages than it is if the self-storage facility's already been here for, months or years and years, right? More than months, I'm sure. So that's an option, but it's not really an option for most people. The other option is actually to add wireless infrastructure. So this is a lot more feasible, and this is a solution that we use very frequently with self-storage, and it allows us to have a lower initial installation cost with very marginal upkeep. There's some upkeep, but it's not as much as you might think when we think about wireless, right? And why is that? So we're not using standard Wi-Fi or anything like that in this situation. It's not your grandma's Wi-Fi kind of thing. We're using specialty wireless bridges. And so these are basically a point-to-point, so they kind of talk to each other, or potentially point to multi-point. We can do a lot with them. And this allows a very reliable, secure connection between those buildings. So what would that actually look like? Let me actually go forward here. You can see that we would install one of the wireless bridges over here and the other one on the building. And so within here too, we would potentially have an external protected infrastructure in here to because again you may not have a space where we can actually put this the rest of the infrastructure like the switches and stuff like that over here. So we potentially would put that outside or inside if you happen to have like a utility room on this side. That's going to depend on your individual thing there, but either way we can work with it. And these are basically talking to each other to be able to extend your network across um, to this side of the building now. And with that, now we're able to add cameras to this building as well. And you can see the coverage difference. So we got a camera over here, we got one over here, we got one over here now. And of course we can basically put anywhere we want to put a camera on the left side of this building. And so this really opens us up to maximizing the coverage with very little long-term investment. Like what these we use Ubiquity technology for these, so they're under $250 each to get this done. So this could be a pretty low cost way to add infrastructure. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be less than having to add zoom cameras to compensate for the distance. So and you can see that this facility is now very, very well covered with this addition here. The only place where we kind of look at it and go, do we have the greatest coverage is maybe there's a little bit of a gap here. But again, that is just because it's outside of the facial recognition range. You're still going to be able to see everything over here, but and of course they're going to have to pass through these cameras as well. So it's a very well protected, well viewed facility here. Um, so again, this is something that we often use in self-storage because self-storage is one of those places where we're often doing retrofits. And we all know that everybody has a budget. We all can't go and spend tens of thousands of dollars to go trench. And even if we want to have that level of coverage, we know that we need to be creative and offer you guys the best value-driven solutions. And so this can actually, another thing that sometimes people do, yeah, we do this to add cameras, but then they add something else over here for, because it's just extending your network at that point. So you can add any other network devices over there. So some people have used like temperature monitors and stuff like that through that too. So kind of opens up your possibilities there. Um, this may seem like a lot, and what I just did in terms of breaking down, hey, let's look at this facility, see what we can do in minimum amount of infrastructure, and then what can we do if we add wireless bridges, or what are the options to get the maximum coverage out of this facility? We do this every day. And this is something that that allows us to really specialize in doing self-storage facilities. And I do see a couple questions. We'll get to them in a second. So, but it can also seem somewhat overwhelming. So anytime that you think, hey, I'm not really sure what I should do with my facility, please reach out to our experts. They will give you, they'll do what I basically just did to this one, really break it down, see what's an option, see what's not an option. And they'll make sure that we get the right solution for you, or we can plan it out in phases too. Like, hey, phase one, we want to cover that right side. And then phase two, we'll talk about adding that bridge later on when we got more budget. We're very flexible in how that's going to work. And again, we can do a turnkey installation for that, or we can allow you to do DIY or self-install. So, all right. And before I go forward here, just because we're on the cover on the subject of this facility that we went over, we do have a couple questions that I'd like to go ahead and answer. And the first one is on the distance end of the wireless network, you show multiple cameras. Is there a PoE switch that you're using to power the cameras? Yeah, so within here, essentially what this would look like is this would connect over to a switch. And excuse my elementary school drawings here, but this would connect to a switch, and then we would connect the cameras to this switch. So yeah, there's going to be a PoE switch connected to this, so that way the cameras can be on the network, get power, everything like that to them. And then a follow-up question to that was also, how do each of these cameras on the far end make it to the separate PoE ports on the NVR in the office? So that's another really good question. This is a pretty long facility, right? One of the technologies that's built within our NVR is something called extended transmission. So that means that most of our cameras, except some of the high-powered PTZs and everything like that, can actually run 750 feet from the NVR or one of our switches. So that's how we would usually compensate for that. And each of them from here inside that conduit would have, its own cable. So, we've got, let's see, potentially one, two, three, four cameras on here. So we'd have four cameras running across the conduit. Obviously, this one would be a pretty short one. This would be a fairly short one, getting a little longer. And then would be the longest one. And the last question I see is your last key point says that something helps other networks. Does that mean with AT&T or Verizon next we currently use? So not like these are on its own sort of wireless signal, rather than being like with AT&T or Verizon or the cellular networks, I should say. Now what you could do is if you have, I know that like a lot of those ones, it's basically extending your internet connection. So within this office here, we have our regular cable, fiber, whatever internet we have here, right? It's basically extending that ability to have a network over here too, on this side of the building. And so what you could do, and I know that some of these provide that, is they do have like cellular boosters that you basically plug into your internet, and it uses your internet instead of the um the cellular signal to be able to give you better phone coverage and everything like that. So that might be an option. That's definitely a device that, as long as it just needs internet access, you've now got internet access on this side of the facility to be able to do something like that. So definitely something like that for sure. And as far as any kind of like infrastructure and stuff like that, or that how fast that these can transmit back and forth, these can actually they're very well. They have a lot of capacity in them. So they'll be able to send a lot of data across and very reliably, and actually they can even go for miles. Actually, we have some that do that. So okay, Eric asked as well, with the wireless bridge, each camera normally plugs into a port on the NVR, and you're drawing, you have five cameras on this end of the bridge. Okay, I gotcha. So yeah, basically, when we add it to the switch here on the PoE cameras here, and over here, this is actually also going to get connected into the network of this office. So what we do there is we basically, if the NVR is on the same network and these cameras, it's basically just extended it. So think of this as like another cable, basically, is the easiest way of looking at it. Even though it's not a physical cable, it actually acts like a cable. So as long as that AirMax or NanoBeam or whatever we're using in that situation is connected to the network, the NVR can also see those cameras. It doesn't have to be directly connected to the NVR to connect to them. So we would just add them manually by their IP address in that point, which again, our support team can help out with, or we would do as part of the installation process. And it would be able to add those cameras without having to be directly plugged in. So we basically go in and say, hey, instead of plug and play, add this camera across the facility. Hopefully that answers the question. Perfect. And appreciate all the questions and interest, and feel free to keep putting all your questions in there as well as we keep going. So, now that we sort of figured out the infrastructure side of it, which is the biggest challenge for most self-storage, like let's talk about some camera solutions that we kind of like talking about with self-storage. And the first one we briefly touched on a second ago was the license plate camera. So we do have a specific license plate camera that allows you to automatically log license plates, search for license plate numbers, and then get specific alerts for certain plates. So if you want to create a list of like maybe people have caused issues in the past, you can get a notification that says, somebody's there with that plate. And you can see kind of what that looks like here. So within the software, you can search. You can see up here, I've searched for HLX, and it lists all of the plates with HLX. You can see the thumbnail as well as the video from here really easily. And why do we like license plate cameras for self-storage? Well, one of the things that I've heard most frequently from self-storage facilities as we've helped them get security is that, self-storage trucks are often visited by, of course, rental trucks, right? And these people are generally like inexperienced drivers, and they may be driving the biggest vehicle they've ever driven in their life. And I had one specifically that was dealing with a lot of struggles to damages to the building when they're backing up, they're hitting the gutters and everything like that, or hitting the building or hitting the gate, fencing, all this kind of stuff. And it's again when usually with the rented moving trucks. And for them, it was very difficult to track down who these, belong to without getting a license plate. Um, and so what we did is we installed our license plate camera, which we call the specialist, at the gate, and every single plate that came in there, we logged. And so when we combine that with like the general coverage that we had across the facility, when damage was found, we were kind of able to find the damage through the other cameras, and then search the cameras for the license plates that came in during that time. And that allowed them to submit that evidence to insurance, so they weren't on the hook for those kind of damages. If you want to learn more about the license plate, we actually did have a webinar just a couple months ago on that, and we have videos and stuff. So we'll get that out there to you guys in the follow-up email to this. But definitely something that we would consider in this situation. One last thing I'll say about it is there's once you get the camera, there's no monthly or subscription fees for using the license plate function. It's all built in to the camera, so we don't charge any additional fees for that. So. The other major one that we typically look at for self-storage is going to be your multi-sensor cameras. And so multi-sensor cameras are basically multiple cameras within one body. So the really key thing with this is that it allows us to have multiple cameras with just one Ethernet cable. And that could be a really big thing for these. Maybe you already have cameras and they're not very good, or maybe you have cameras, but you want to add more coverage, but now it's, harder because the cable's already been run, everything like that. And so what this allows us to do in those situations is with one Ethernet cable, be able to get multiple cameras out of it essentially. So you can see over here, we've got one that has two lenses. So this is like the dome, and it can be pointed, in different directions. So allow us to kind of cover both sides of an aisle in a self-storage area. And we also have ones that have four lenses that can allow us to point them and kind of show different areas. So there's a lot of flexibility with that. And again, not to talk about the other webinar, but I believe the webinar we did last month was on multi-sensor. So, we dive deep into that. So if you're interested in learning more, we'll have that as well. But multi-sensors can really open up what we can do with limited infrastructure as well. And then this is another part of the camera solution. This is active deterrence. So if you're not familiar with active deterrence, this is great for facilities that aren't supposed to be open or have access 24/7. And so what it does is the cameras are able to detect if that's a person or a vehicle on them, and it will give an audible or visual alert to any intruders. So that's going to be, you can see in this image here, it's got the light. The white light turns on, the red and blue light turns on, and there's also a audio component from the speaker of the camera that says, hey, this business is closed, leave. And the idea is that this is potentially going to prevent you from having somebody go in and have unlimited amount of time to actually do what they need at a self-storage facility, like breaking in and everything like that. And it can also send notifications to your smartphone as well, so hey, a person's been detected at 3 a.m. And I'll give you an example here. This is actually real world footage that we had at a warehouse that this person had been going around the warehouse for quite a while now. And they were late at night with a flashlight. And so we installed some active deterrence cameras to try to deter that person away. And we'll see kind of what happens here. Hear that? So once the camera actually gets alerted there, or it sees the person there, it turns on the white light, so that gets us color, which is it's really nice too in this dark part of the warehouse with no lighting and stuff like that. But then it also sends that warning message here too. So and he left, and after that, that person never came back to the facility. So it can be a very effective way of preventing intrusions and everything like that. So, but question might be, there's two questions I usually get with that is, well, we're a 24/7 facility. I don't want, my cameras yelling at my customers either. How do you deal with that? Or also, what if you don't want to answer alerts at 2 a.m.? Like, do you want to be the guy who actually gets a notification at 2 a.m. and has to figure out, is that person a customer? Is that person just driving through? Everything like that. The answer to that is we do have a service called remote guarding or professional camera monitoring. And what this basically does is it adds that same kind of concept of, intelligence watching your camera, but it does it with a combination of a US based remote guard and a UL listed remote monitoring station. So when there's an event on your camera, that person, that remote guard is going to watch that feed, make sure that they're doing okay, that they're not somebody suspicious with cutting locks or anything like that. Or are they just accessing their stuff late at night? So if they do determine that, hey, this person is a threat and they're breaking in or something, or they're vandalizing it, graffiti, etc., they can do a bunch of different things based on what you want, including dispatching police, any guards that you may have in the area, or they can also do a two-way audio warning. So instead of like a pre-recorded message, they can specifically call that person out, which tends to be a lot more effective. So they can say, hey, you in the green shirt, which I'm wearing a green shirt. They can specifically call me out, and I'm probably going to listen to that a little bit more than pre-recorded notification. And try to again prevent that activity from happening and avoid all the stuff we talked about early on about mending relationships. So as a kind of like a quick look here, again, this is the way it works. When a person or vehicle is detected in front of the camera, it detects, and then it gets sent to that US based remote guard that analyzes it, uses human intelligence, and determines, is this person really a threat? They're trained to know what to look for as well. And then again, if there is a threat, they can respond, sending police, talk downs, dispatching any on guards, calling people, or of course all of the above as well. And this is a very flexible thing. So this is something that we can do 24/7. So if you have stuff that happens during the middle of the day, you can do this. Or you can just do it. A lot of people just do it overnight. So like 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. or something like that. And it's customizable in terms of the response, the scheduling. Let us know what you need, tell us your needs, and we'll see what we can do for you. And as I mentioned, it can dispatch police, verify a lot, and one of the things about dispatching police with this service is that a verified alarm where somebody's watching the incident live gets a much quicker police response time typically than an alarm system that is just not monitored. There's no camera. In some services, actually, some alarms in some cities require having video now to even dispatch at this point. So. And another last kind of key benefit here is incident reports. Every single time that there's an incident, you'll get an email and the clips and everything like that to be able to see exactly what happened during the day and let you know what happened. So let's put this in the real world. The first one is a car dealership, but a lot of the same concepts apply here. This is overnight, and little before looks like 11 o'clock here. And this group of looks like teenagers or whatever goes into this car and they send out a two-way audio conversation here. So
You are not authorized. Leave now. Police have been dispatched and are on their way.
if you couldn't hear that, it just says, hey, if you're not authorized, leave now. Police have been dispatched on their way. They hear that and they literally run out of the facility, right? And so this is exactly kind of the response that we want to have with this service, that instead of them going and stealing this vehicle potentially or vandalizing it or and then potentially vandalizing all the other ones here, it prevented that crime from actually happening and prevented a whole lot of headaches for the rest of the week. So, and again, key thing, this is all happening while the client's sleeping soundly. They're not being woken up at 2 a.m. You'll get an incident report in the morning, depending on how you want to, obviously you can get alerted if you want to, but because that's no longer a threat, they didn't even need to know about that until the morning. And clip number 2 is an auto part warehouse. And basically, you can see that they're running out with tires and rims. And, in this case, they do the talk down, but they ignore it, right? So maybe that's not always 100% effective. So what happens in this case? Well, if you're not listening, we're going to dispatch the police. And you can see within, let's see, go back to the times here, at 9:36 is when they're first walking by. And then at 9:42 is when the police actually arrive. So, the dispatching happened very quickly. And then because of it being a live incident that somebody's sitting there watching and giving them play-by-play on, basically, they're there very quickly and they were apprehended and all the property was not stolen. So, and this actually all happened within less than 8 minutes from start to finish. So, and again, all while somebody's sleeping soundly. So this is probably one of the most effective ways of utilizing cameras to actively protect your self-storage facility. And this actually even has like a marketing potential. Some of the clients we work with that do this service actually advertise it to their clients. Hey, we've got 24/7 or overnight remote guarding, or it's a secure facility, so that your valuables are safe and sound. And as I did see a question there about this being a fee. Yes, this is generally averages out to be about $85 per month per camera, which equals out to about being less than $3 per day per camera, or something like 26 cents per hour. So it's definitely not a the cheapest service in the world, but what the value it potentially can provide, both in terms of maybe marketing potential, but also preventing things, could be worth it with just one incident, basically. So, and last couple things, as we kind of wind down this webinar, is don't forget simple things like lighting. You know, we don't SCW doesn't sell lighting, but it's something that we always mention because we don't want people to hide in the dark and be able to be kind of hidden there, right? External lighting is a deterrent in itself. It helps people see it from, like, if your self-storage facilities on a road and you see somebody acting suspicious or cutting a lock or something like that, somebody driving by may call the police, and that could be obviously really beneficial. It also helps the police see things as they're there. So if they've got an incident and they're trying to look and see what's happening, if it's super dark, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to find and apprehend that person. And then as a bonus, kind of tailing back into what we do, the security camera side, the more light, the better the night vision is going to look. So at that point, maybe you don't even have, if you have decent enough lighting, a lot of our cameras don't even need to go into the infrared black and white mode. They can stay color, which is a really important if you want to get details on somebody, being able to know what color shirt they have or stuff like that can be a key thing to get them apprehended. And the last thing we'll talk about real quick is just access control. A lot of the newer facilities are actually looking at using access control, especially the indoor ones, on individual lockers. So this is a way of increasing security, simplifying the access for people, and it also allows them to get gate access as well. So, if you want maybe access control just on the gate, that's something that we can do as well. And access control is definitely a, kind of a complicated subject. So definitely reach out to us. This is something that we can install for you nationwide. And with that, that's the end of this webinar. I do see a couple questions. Any other questions anybody has, feel free to put them in now. Otherwise, I do appreciate everyone's attendance and attention and questions that you guys have provided. Look for the follow-up email. We'll have more information on stuff that we talked about here. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to our security experts who can provide this kind of info and help for you. So, and then start with the Q&A. Single lens camera, or can it involve 2 or 4 lens ones? So if you're talking about the remote guarding, they can utilize any camera that we sell. So whether that's the multi-sensor or the single lens one. And the if it's a multi-sensor, they are still multiple cameras basically to them, so it wouldn't be any less to say, for example, do the 4-1 with that. But feel free to reach out to us, and I'll get some clarification on that for sure. And then another one, I'm planning to set up a new SCW camera solution at a dairy farm and beef cattle farm. I would love to have a call with somebody about that. We'll definitely get you a call. Dylan there will get you set up with one of our experts so they can go in and talk about that. And then Jason asked if we get paid a commission or residuals for remote guarding. Assume you're probably like a reseller or installer. Talk to your account manager, and we'll talk about kind of how we can set that up there. We're not really set up in a way to do that right now, but you're free to sort of charge whatever you want on that to your client. If you prefer billing your client, you can do that. And then we just charge you what the rate is for you guys. So just let us know for that, and we can definitely see what we can do to make sure that you're making some recurring revenue on that as well. Anything else you want to add, Dylan, while we kind of wrap up here? Maybe wait for a couple more questions if they come in.
I think you covered it really well. I love not your grandma's internet, made me laugh.
Yeah.
But no, I think just to recap, we're going to send the recording after this, along with kind of the Q&A and the main stuff, and then links to everything we talked about, some of the other webinars where we breezed through on this presentation, but covered in depth previously. Send that over as well. But no, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. If you have any questions about any of that, whether it's the multi-sensor, the license plate, again, reach out to our team, or we'll go through it with you as well. You don't always have to watch every webinar, though I recommend it. But feel free to reach out to us and let the experts do their thing as well. So I'll give it just maybe another minute or two here, and if there's no other questions, we'll go and close this out. And hope everyone has a great rest of your week and a good weekend coming up. Looks like that's so far all the questions that I see. So if you do have any other questions, again, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. And thank you again for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
See you guys.